Welcome back. This is our special July 4th edition of the IRS Radio Hour. There's nothing more American,
plural,
than the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service.
Which is sad to say.
It is sad to say, but it's true. But this is, what segment are we on now, Jim?
It's the blog segment.
It's the blog segment. The blog. The blog.
Now, I'm going to have to tell you that your sister, Jessica, redid the beginning of the blog segment on our videos, and it's actually really good. You got to see it, and I'll show it to you.
Really?
Yeah. So you.
Why are you telling me this?
You
now?
Listeners, go. We're going to put it on. You'll see the
I gotta go
any
to
of the blog segments. ChicagoTaxTeam.com, and you'll see the blog segment. And again, she did a really nice beginning for the blog
Remember,
segment.
ladies and gentlemen, you need any videos edited? Hey, you need any videos edited whatsoever? I mean, this isn't. Hey, Jessica Leahy's best in the business. So
that's right. We're gonna. That's true, and I think she does a great job for us. But I wanted to point that out to you. She just did it. I just saw it the other day, so really good. This segment, we're going to talk. I had written a blog segment about to describe my most common clients and what goes on, how we go about solving IRS problems. But I'm going to save that for another day.
A rainy day.
Well, doesn't have to rain. But I'm saving it for another day because it's the 4th of July and because Jimmy and I, on the way here, had a nice discussion about the justices and what's going on. So there's two instances that really brought this matter up. One is this new Supreme Court decision in which Anthony Kennedy went with the liberal justices and they got a 5-3 decision because there's only 8 of them now.
Okay.
So and he went with the more liberal wing of the court and decided that Texas, that required their abortion clinics to have the doctors at abortion clinics to have access to or admission access to hospitals close by, so if there's an emergency, the women could get emergency health care. The court said, "Nah, you can't do that. That's an imposition. That might require some women to travel farther to get an abortion, and we can't have that. That's an imposition of their rights."
That just doesn't seem correct.
Doesn't make any sense to me. Doesn't it seems, and kind of opposite. There's so much of everything that happens in America now seems to be more controlled, more. We want more safety, more. Cars you can't do these. You can't have a car that doesn't have every safety feature in the world on it because
which costs more.
Which costs more money in the government. All this stuff. They don't want us to have sugar. They don't want us to have. They're regulating
which costs
everything.
More.
They're regulating everything, but.
I mean, we grow tobacco in the country, and it's $11 a pack. I don't smoke anymore. I'm not a smoker.
Good for you. Good for
I'm
you,
not a smoker. But I'm just saying, I don't think it should be.
But I'm saying it seems like opposite of what's going on. Same thing with immigration. We let it's like we bend over backwards and don't apply the law in so many areas. And here it seems like they want safety measures. They say, no, you can't have any safety measures. You can't do that. That's ridiculous. So, and then the second one was there's a justice here I shouldn't call him a justice, a judge here in the 7th Circuit. We're in the 7th Circuit here in Chicago, and the court's downtown. And Judge Posner is a judge here in the U.S. Court of Appeals, 7th Circuit, and a judge that I admired, and I read a lot of his in the law when I was in law school. He's been around forever. He was appointed by Ronald Reagan, and he's been around forever. And I read a lot of his opinions, and I admired him, and I thought he was a very well thought out conservative jurist. But this is what he said. And on another note about academia and practical law, I see absolutely no value to a judge of spending decades, years, months, weeks, day, hours, minutes, or seconds studying the Constitution, the history of its enactment, its amendments, and the implication across the centuries, well, just a little more than 2 centuries, and of course less for many of the amendments. 18th century guys, however smart, could not foresee the culture, technology, etc. of the 21st century, which means that the original Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the post-Civil War amendments, including the 14th, do not speak to today. David Strauss Strauss is right. The Supreme Court treats the Constitution like it is authorizing the court to create a common law of constitutional law based on current concerns, not what those 18th century guys were worrying about. In short, let's not let the dead bury the living. So we don't have to worry. Now, this gentleman, when you take over a judiciary, when you get sworn in,
yes,
you take an oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States
of America.
And if the Constitution doesn't apply, well, then there are ways in the Constitution to change it, to make it apply. First off, I think it applies because it's about human nature, not about technology, not about what kind of mode of transportation you have or communication.
That's a failure that a lot of people have. They go, well, for example, this is such a largely talked about, amendment, the Second Amendment. It was meant for muskets, not semi-automatic fire, and the arguments is that it's basic human nature that this Constitution applies to. Now, I've argued with people about it, especially people who are in the who are in psychology. I'm not offending anybody. I'm not trying to say it is I didn't graduate college, so I'm just saying that if you graduated college, whatever major you got, God bless you. You did something I couldn't do, and I'm not saying I can't.
Okay. So let's move on from that because I think you're not
even now. Just let me just say my piece.
Okay. Okay, got it.
Well, thanks for that, Stephen. What was I trying to say?
I don't know.
That they were arguing that, people argue basic human nature and this and that, but that's what the Constitution is meant for. That's what the Constitution is implemented for, and they followed their history.
In my mind, if these men were making the Constitution today, they'd still have the Second Amendment. They'd still have the First Amendment. They wouldn't say, we don't need the Second Amendment because we have dangerous guns. No, they would still have the Second Amendment. What we were talking about is why is it that these conservative justices that go on these courts later become more liberal, but never the liberal judges become more conservative? Why is that? And then Jim would say, well, maybe we're on the wrong side.
And that's what I asked. Is conservatism and actually constitutionalism on the wrong side? I mean, do they know something that I don't know? I mean, they are in a position of power. They are trusted with our laws.
Okay. And my response to that is exactly what you just said. They are in positions of power, and that power gives them the authority to do whatever they want. And when you're a conservative, you can't exercise that power. You have to follow others who put a constitution and limits on your power. And so what they're saying is, I don't need them to limit my power. I'm smarter than them. I know what has to be done, and I'm going to do it the way I see fit, regardless of what the Constitution says. And I think that's why conservative justices become liberal, because they start putting their own ideas in place of everybody else's ideas and somehow think they're better than everybody else, and they don't need the Constitution to limit the effect they have on mankind.
Yes.
And that's exactly why we need the Constitution, because people like Posner and people like Kennedy should follow the law and not make it up as they go along.
That is what that is for, and that is what that document is for, is to limit those kind of people that are the outside the box.
That's why you have people, the liberal thinkers, they don't care about what the Constitution says. They're more outcome based. What they figure the way that it should, that the outcome should be, and then figure a way around it instead
Wherever
of following.
we follow the law.
Exactly, and they don't always follow the law because they don't want to, because it doesn't reach them to the conclusion they want to be yet, and that's why we have liberal justices.
People are taking a look at the government in such a wrong way as we the people, not they.
At least it used to be.
They the enthroned.
I think the only thing that gives me hope, and this Brexit whatever it is, it gives me hope. Why? Because nobody wanted that. The elites didn't want it. The media didn't want it. Those in charge didn't want it. And we're still going to have to fight it, because I tell you, just because they voted it in doesn't mean these people are going to do what they're supposed to do. They're not going to. And we have people like Kerry, our Secretary of State, telling us how finding ways to get around their vote. So that to me is ridiculous, and he should he should be removed just for that opinion. My own opinion.
If the IRS is coming after you and they don't like your opinion on them, Remember, ladies and gentlemen, there's only one person to call, one law firm to call, which is Opem Tax Resolutions at 312-664-6649, or visit chicagotaxteam.com. Now, stay tuned, because after the commercial break, more 4th of July special here on the IRS Radio Hour is coming at you here on AM 560.
The Answer.